Hi, this is Mark Lassoff from LearnToProgram.tv. In this tutorial, I'm going to give you a gentle introduction to the Location Manager, or what's commonly called Geolocation, using the Android device. So what I've got up here is my Android emulator on the left, and then my DDMS view here on the right. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to send to the device a set of longitude and latitude. So let's set negative 121 point, I don't know that, and latitude 31.758. I send that to the device, which simulates the device actually getting these coordinates. And there the device indicates that it gets that particular latitude and longitude. You certainly could try this on a real device, and you could see that as you moved, it would get new latitude and longitude coordinates, and it would display those continually as you moved around from location to location. So we've got that project closed up. Let's go ahead and create a new project. We'll go ahead and start a new here. So I'm going to choose a new Android project. I know you can't see the drop downs. We'll name the project, let's just name it Geolocation, and let's target Android 2.2. Package name we'll call com.learntoprogram.android. And I'm going to target the SDK version 8, which you can't see because it's a little bit cut off, but don't worry about that too much, and click Finish. And that, of course, creates my project from the template. And we've got our Java source file here. And we've got a number of other support files here in the resources folder. So what I'm going to do first, what I traditionally do first, is I deal with the layout and I deal with the manifest. Now, the manifest, of course, is kind of a management file for the application, and it contains a whole bunch of settings that are needed for applications, and we set up the different activities there, etc. You could see some of the information from the manifest right here in the GUI representation. We could look at the XML for the manifest by clicking the XML tab here at the bottom. So what I need to do is add permission for the device to access a find location. So we're going to choose the uses permission element. And from the drop down here, we're going to access find location, which I think is that one. Access find location. So once I've done that, it's actually added that to the XML right here. Uses permission, and then the permission name from the Android namespace, Android permission access find location. So that permission has been added. We can now save the manifest file, and we are done with it, so I can close it. Next, I'm going to move to the main XML file. This is the layout for our first or primary activity and the only activity we're going to have in this application. I'm going to go ahead and choose Android 2.2 from the type of layout we're going to do here. And it's going to think for a minute, and then it's going to show me what is an approximation of what the Android device would look like for my application. This also has an XML file in the back end that I can manipulate if I choose. So I actually don't need this particular text view right here, so I'm going to eliminate it altogether by deleting it from the outline. And you'll notice our text views here in the form widgets are separated into large, medium, and small. If you're used to older versions of Android, you may not have seen these particular options, but this lets us default the text to small, medium, or large. And of course, if we wanted to, we could set the text size ourselves. So I'm going to use a small and then a large. I'm just dragging these into place here. Another small and then a large. And we're going to change these particular labels to say latitude and longitude, and then the actual latitude and longitude will display in these two other text views. So I'm going to double click, and this takes me to the XML, and here you can see all of the XML that makes up the text views. Now, what I'm actually interested in is the text property right here. So this text property, I'm going to change on the first one from text view, which is what's in there now, to latitude. And let's go ahead and erase the second one. And the third one will be longitude. And we'll erase the fourth one. Now, if we go back to our design, it now looks like this. the two that I erased are appearing invisibly, but if we check the outline, they're still there, 2 and 4. Now for 2 and 4, we're going to need to access those through the code programmatically. So I'm going to have to give those names, or more specifically, IDs. So I'm going to go down here into the Properties panel, and with this text view selected, I'm going to look for the ID property. Now you have to be careful when you're adding ID properties because they have to be preceded with this @ plus ID and slash, and then the name you give it. So this is going to be for the latitude. So let's call this text lat. And you can see it's renamed that right here. Let's choose the fourth one. And for its ID, let's rename it text long for the text longitude. I'm not going to bother giving new IDs to this particular text view, which has just the word latitude, or this particular text view, which just has the word longitude, because these particular text views will never change. They're always going to be exactly the same and have the same content in it. All right, so now I've got my UI, my user interface designed. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. And that saves the main XML file, and I can close it. I'm now going to turn my attention to the actual Java file. And in the Java file is where I'm going to actually create the code that's going to allow the results of the geolocation activity to appear within those two text views. So we've got our template that's provided by the framework. And here inside the class, where we had says public class and the name I gave the class extends activity, we're going to create a couple of class level references. We're going to create references to what will become the two text views. A text view called text lat and a text view called text long. Now don't get these particular labels confused with the IDs. The IDs are just used for internal purposes, and they represent an actual integer that is the ID itself. Now notice here I've got red underlines here in the Eclipse environment. That red underline simply indicates that we haven't yet imported the text view control. See, it shows us the quick fixes. So in this one we haven't done the import. So if we click it, it's going to do the import for us. And if we look here in the imports, you can see android.widget.textView has been imported. Now, we could have imported that manually, but it's always easier to use our environment to do that type of thing. So because I put these outside here in the class, these particular references will be accessible anywhere inside the class. So now I'm going to go into our onCreate override. This overrides the onCreate activity, and every time the activity that displays our actual content is created, it's run. So this basically gets the saved instance state, which is what's going on in the Android application at this moment, and then we set the content view to r.layout.main. You remember our main XML? Well, it's setting the actual view to our main XML. So this actually displays the controls that we just did in the GUI where we created the 4 text views. All right, so now what I've got to do is I've got to get these 2 text views and access them through the code. Now I created the references here, but I've got to load into those references the actual views. So text lat equals, and now we're going to use the text view here, and that's called a cast. We're going to cast what is returned by find view by ID. When I use find view by ID, I'm going to give this r.id.textLat. What that's going to do is that's going to assign the textLat element from our old XML. If you remember our old XML here, we called this guy textLat. So that's basically getting this guy right here and giving us access to it through the code. We need to do the same thing for text long. So text long, we'll cast that as a text view. Find view by ID, r.id.textLong. I highly recommend you use the drop-downs that are provided in the Eclipse development environment. They're there to help you, and if you use them, it's going to be a lot easier to write the correct code. All right, so we have our references to our objects. So now it's time for the nitty-gritty. We've got to create a location manager object. Now we actually get the location manager object from the context. And the context is an object that allows our activities or application to communicate with the Android operating system and allows the different activities within our application to communicate with each other. So we're going to create a reference to the location manager, which we'll call LM. That's our reference. And then we'll, again, same type of thing here. We'll cast as a location manager. Now here, the red underlines, you think you know what they mean? We need to import the location manager object. And let's see, it doesn't seem to recognize that I must have a typo in there. Let's try that again. Location manager. And then, nope, looks like I just reacted too quickly. Sometimes you got to type the whole line before you actually have to deal with the errors. All right, so our location manager, and that's casting what's returned by get system service, and we give get system service context dot, and in here you'll see a bunch of services. We want the location service. So now our location manager, or our reference to a location manager object, is called LM. Now we also need a location listener object. That's called LL. The location listener object is instantiated the way you might traditionally instantiate a object like this. Mistake. Now it's time to create our location listener object. Our location listener object is going to listen for changes in the location, and when those changes occur, we code it to do something. So let's go ahead and import location listener. We're going to call our reference to location listener LL, and we're going to assign that, or rather we're going to instantiate that by saying new my location listener, like that. Now, that will make sense in just a minute, because it looks like we're instantiating that in kind of an odd way. But hold on for just a second, and that's going to make more sense. Now that we've got our location listener object, what we're going to do is we're going to use our location manager to request location updates, and then we've got to feed that several arguments. The first is the provider. So the provider here is going to be the location manager.gps provider. So that says we're going to use the GPS provider for location updates. So the minimum time is going to be 0. The minimum distance is going to be 0. And our location listener, that's just the location listener object we just created, LL. All right, so we've created our location updates, location manager and our location listener. We've linked the two by requesting the location updates here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create what's called an inner class. That inner class is going to be the location listener, and we code the location listener to basically do what we want when there's a location change. So here we'll do private class my location listener, and that's going to have to implement the location listener with a capital L interface. Now, what that does for us is it says that my location listener is going to have certain methods. Now, those methods are going to allow us to do certain things when the location changes. So I'm going to go ahead and add the unimplemented methods, and it automatically adds the unimplemented methods for us. And there we go. And let's see here. Create class my location listener. Does not match my location listener. Let's just make sure those are spelled the same here. For some reason, it's not recognizing the inner class. We'll check that out in a bit. All right, so we're going to deal with on location changed. Now, on location changed is going to get, when it's called, the location that's generated by the location manager. So this is going to run every time our location changes. So first of all, we've got to make sure the location itself is not null. If the location is null, then we don't want to do this. That means we got the location changed, but we didn't get a location back. All right, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to now create a double that I'll call longitude, location.get longitude. So that uses the location object and gets the longitude that's been sent as part of this location object when this is called. Now we also need a latitude object, or latitude rather, double, get latitude. So now the actual latitude and longitude are sitting in these two variables. So now we need to display that latitude and longitude in the text views that we created earlier. So textlat dot set text is what we need to use to set the text within it. And we're going to use double to string plat, because this doesn't display doubles, it displays strings. So what we do is we use the double class statically. We call the toString method, we get plat, we get that value, and we convert it. So now for text long, we'll do the same thing. Set text. For some reason my computer gets really slow when I try set text. Not sure why that happens within Eclipse, but it does. All right, so double dot to string p long. So that sets both of these. Let's go ahead and save. And now lastly, let me figure out whatever the issue is with my location listener right here and why that's underlined in red and not recognizing the inner class that I just created. And as usual, it's something very simple. We just forgot a closing bracket right there. All right, so that takes care of the small issue. So let's go over the code one more time before we test it out. Go ahead and save. And let me get rid of the now extra one at the bottom. There we go. That takes care of all of our errors. So this, of course, runs. This is our code for this particular activity. It's the only activity in the actual application. We create textlat and textlong, which are references to text view objects. We create those globally so we can access them both from the mGeolocation activity class and the inner class my location listener. All right, so we get the instance state. We set the content view to main, that main XML. We get our text view objects by their IDs that we created before, textlat and textlong, using the find view by ID method. We create a location manager. So we get the location manager by calling getSystemService, which gets one from the context. That means that gets it from the operating system itself. So we get the location service. We then call the location list. We don't create a location listener. And we instantiate that as a new instance of location listener, which I've done as an inner class, which I've called my location listener. Now, the location listener implements location listener. That location listener interface requires that we have on location changed, on provider disabled, on provider enabled, and on status changed. Now, I haven't written any code for on provider disabled, on provider enabled, and on status changed because we didn't need any for this demo. In a true application that you went to production with, you'd want to deal with the provider being disabled, the provider being enabled, and the status being changed, and either alert the user or deal with it programmatically depending on what you're doing. So when the location is changed, the location manager will provide a location to this onLocationChanged method. That location is a location object, which we call location. And if it's not null, meaning we actually got something back, we'll use the location object to get the longitude, to get the latitude, and put those in doubles called plong and plat. We then go ahead and set the text boxes that we created, or the text views that we created, and we use the plat and plong variables that I just created that have our actual locations. We toString those so they can be displayed. All right, so let's go ahead and actually build our application. I've already created a test environment. I've already created an emulator for this. So we're going to create a new Android application debug configuration. And we're going to target our mgeolocation project. And chocolate is the particular device that I'm going to use. So I'm going to call this geolocation demo. It's the name of this configuration. And then we can go ahead and use this, and we just click the debug button right here. And what I like to do while it's loading the debugger is I usually switch to the DDMS view. MS view gives us a lot more information about what's going on with our emulator. So we can watch the logcat, and as our emulator comes online, we can see exactly what's happening in the logcat so we can track the loading and building of our application. And there we can see our logcat as part of the DDMS view is filled with lots of information as this booted. So now our application is actually displayed here in the emulator. You can see the latitude and longitude. So let's send the device an actual latitude and longitude. So we got to go here into our emulator control. And this is the longitude and latitude that's in there by stock. So we'll click send. That sends it to the device. And there it's displayed in the device itself. A latitude of 37,422,005 and a longitude of -122. Let's just try a couple of others. Let's set it a longitude of 55.523 and a latitude of -0.255. We'll send, and there it's getting the information. I would highly recommend that you try this on an actual device if you have one. It's fairly easy to hook up your device to the actual development environment and test on a real device. This way you can walk around and watch the longitude and latitude change as the location manager updates. I'm Mark Lassoff with LearnToProgram.tv. Please check our website, LearnToProgram.tv, for the full code for this tutorial. Good luck!